New York City, not New York State, talking about, now brace yourself. New York City, the budget for ACS in New York City, I think this year, $3.2 billion with a B for one city agency, not state agency, city agency.
Hello and welcome to the Attorney Post, where we give you the inside scoop with top attorneys in their field. And now, here's our host, Justin West.
All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Attorney Post, where we discuss what's going on in various facets of the law with attorneys at the top of their game to help you navigate the various ins and outs and various legal fields and jurisdictions. Because, as I always say, if you don't know your rights, you don't have any. Today, I'm very pleased to be joined by David Zaslavsky, who runs the eponymous law firm that bears his name. I think it's down on the south side of Manhattan, if I'm not mistaken. David, how are you doing today?
I'm good. And yes, you are right. I'm in the financial district of Manhattan.
That's awesome. One of my, I have a long-term client and friend who is in that area as well. So I've never set foot in New York City that I'm aware of, but I'm very familiar with a lot of the scenery because a lot of the stuff I've done with him over the years. So that's really awesome. Well, David, let's jump over really quickly. I want to take a look at your website. David, again, is on the masthead here at Zaslavsky Law, and that is we'll put it in the show notes down below. But it's Zaslavsky Law.com. We'll also have his other contact information, phone number, etc. But he runs a very successful law firm, again, that bears his name. The law office of David Zaslavsky PLLC is a Brooklyn-based firm focused exclusively on. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's in my notes. That's weird. We'll just say New York-based firm, focused on family and matrimonial law since 2004. Known for its results-driven approach, the firm helps navigate complex and emotional, legally charged matters with clarity, strategy, and compassion across all of the boroughs of New York City. And there is on Manhattan, right there in the financial district, right down here is where the offices are. So that is his information, and we will dive into him a little bit further here in just a minute. But before we do that, we are going to read from our sponsors. Let me actually make sure I have my notes up here. Sponsor number one is Groove. Entrepreneurs and dream chasers, listen up. If you're running an online business, it doesn't have to mean drowning in subscriptions or wrestling with messy tech stacks. Groove is rolling out a jaw-dropping limited-time offer. You can run your entire operation. Think stunning websites with Groove pages, high-converting sales funnels, email campaigns, e-commerce stores, even affiliate programs, all absolutely free for an entire year. No credit card required up front. That's right. Over 1 million users are already saving thousands of dollars and scaling their businesses smarter with this all-in-one platform that replaces tools like ClickFunnels and Shopify and everything else. There's no risk, there's no hidden fees, just pure, powerful growth potential to help you focus on what matters most, building your empire. But hurry, this deal won't last forever. Jump in now and see why Groove is the secret weapon every entrepreneur needs in 2025. Visit theattorneypost.com/groove to sign up for free. Again, no credit card even required. And hey, if you can't make it profitable after a year, just cancel. So visit theattorneypost.com/groove. Our second sponsor for today is, I think it's Habanero Social. What if Google could send you free customers or clients every single week, every single month? With Habanero Social, it's not just a fantasy, it's a reality. Habanero Social's AI-powered platform optimizes your Google business profile to attract more local customers effortlessly. From cranking out high-quality content to managing reviews and fine-tuning your local SEO, Habanero Social handles it all while you sit back and watch your business grow. 90% of searches stay on page one, and if it's a local search, 85% of searches happen in the Google Maps pack. That's the place you need to be in order to capture all of those clients. An optimized Google business profile doesn't just show up, it engages. It builds trust and increases clicks and ultimately boosts your business. And Habanero Social is so confident that what they do will work that they will offer a 3 times ROI guarantee. If you don't make more than you spend with them, they will refund your money or continue to work for free until you do. Stop wasting time on old school tactics. Visit habanerosocial.com. Automate everything you need to rank higher, engage better, and drive more customers to your business or clients to your firm with habanerosocial.com. Completely risk-free. Let the AI do all the heavy lifting for you. Alrighty, and jumping back over here, let me stop the old screen share. So again, I am talking with David Zaslavsky, who runs the law firm over here that bears his name, Zaslavsky Law. David was born in Latvia, if I'm not mistaken, and came to the United States as a child, growing up in Brooklyn, where he still lives and practices today. I don't know if that's correct now or not. I'm second
Uh,
guessing myself.
I've been practicing in Manhattan for most of the time. I mean,
Okay.
I am in all five boroughs. I am present in. I take cases in five boroughs of New York City, Brooklyn, Manhattan, Staten Island, Queens, and the Bronx. But my office is in downtown Manhattan.
My I have my assistant draw up the show notes for me, and so I think there must be something on your website or in your maybe in your LinkedIn profile or something that talked about being in Brooklyn or something. So that's okay. It's mostly accurate. We know he's in New York City. He earned a BA in history, which I want to talk to you about that in a couple minutes as well. I also have a BA in history from New York University. Later received a JD from Brooklyn Law School, officially entering the legal field in 2003. And for over 2 decades, David has dedicated his practice exclusively to family and matrimonial law, developing a deep understanding of both the legal and complex realities and the people behind the cases. With a firm grasp on the personalities and procedures of New York City's family and Supreme Courts, David brings both practical knowledge and personal commitment to his work. Now that was a mouthful, and I'm sure I missed a few things for sure. Maybe even misstated a few things. So my first question to you, David, as always, is just this: what did I miss?
So the thing, and I guess the thing that I bring to the table a lot more than many, if not most, of my colleagues is there is an agency, as it is in every state, in every city. It's the Child Protective Agency, and it's called CPS in most places. In New York City, it's called ACS, Administration for Children's Services. And I am one of maybe five completely private attorneys who handles matrimonial cases, custody cases, but also has a deep knowledge of that agency and how they operate. I've never worked for any agency. I don't work for the courts in any way, shape, or form. I'm not on what's called the 18B panel, which is a panel of attorneys that take cases from the courts from indigent clients. I work for money. I don't work for anyone else. I don't have, but most of these attorneys, most of my colleagues, do not have that very particular set of skills that I do. I kind of fell into it about midway into my practice, and for the last 22 years, I kind of fell into it. And I am one of the few of us being the entirety of the family law bar here in New York City, who knows this area of the law, but also knows the private area of the law, because the attorneys who handle that generally don't do divorces. They don't take a lot of private clients because they either work for an agency or they work for the courts. The majority of their practice are cases that are given to them by the courts. So I think that's one of the things that I bring to the table. If ACS gets involved in your case, and unfortunately in many custody cases they do, I'm one of the few people that understands how to deal with them, and it is a very, you deal with them like you deal with any like with any raging animal with a freaking sharp stick or a newspaper. They are not nice in any way, shape, or form.
So there you have it, folks. Zaleski Law, your sharp stick against the ACS.
There you go. There you
That's your new tagline, and I want a nickel every time it's printed.
go.
No, that's really awesome. So we're going to dive into a lot more of that here in a little bit. Now, you did say you kind of fell into this, so I'm kind of curious, what got you into law? Did you grow up watching Perry Mason, right? Were you always just knowing that law was your jam? Was this a midlife crisis thing? Did you start off? I know you did some history, like I said. Did you start down that path and just decide, no, I need to pay the bills. I'm going to do law instead. What led you into law, and then what led you into family law?
So I'll tell you, I decided that I wanted to be a lawyer when I was, I think, in seventh or eighth grade. We had this program in my school, which was a school court, and my class was the class that was dubbed where the lawyers and the judges would come from. So we learned some very basic legal concepts, and then some of us became lawyers, some of us became judges, and this very rudimentary sort of disciplinary court, and the litigants were basically kids in the school who had done some kind of minor infraction. And yeah, I found it to be fascinating. The idea of making an argument, the idea of representing somebody. It's fascinating work. I oftentimes say that This is one of the last few professions where it's an actual contest, where
Mm.
it's mano a mano or womano or whomever. You know, outside of fight sports, this is one of the few professions where you get before someone and it's, you know, may the best man win, may the best case win, may the best story win, may the best line of bullshit win, whatever it is, whatever you have. So yeah, I mean, I really enjoy what I do. Some of it is boring, sure. Not every job is perfect, but I enjoy getting up in the morning, going to work because I like the contest. I like the game.
That's awesome.
And
That's
as
awesome.
far as, and your second question was why family law?
Yeah.
So unlike a lot of my colleagues who they went to law school, they did clinics, they did this, they did that. I worked for a law firm. I started working for that firm. I took a gap year between college and law school, and I started working for the firm. At first, just as a filing clerk and stuff and doing stuff like that. And then they sent me to court to do what's called expediting, which is actually dealing with the clerks and filing papers and doing stuff like that. And after my first year in law school, they gave me as an assistant to a small department they were starting, was a family law department that firm was starting. It was an immigration firm, and they just started a more complex family law department. So they gave me kind of as an assistant. I wound up writing all the papers for two family, not all, but I'd say like 80% of all the papers, all the motions, all the everything in a law firm, in a medium-sized firm with, and this sub firm of two lawyers. I was the paralegal, but more than the paralegal, because a paralegal usually doesn't draft papers. I was drafting papers, I was making arguments, I was preparing them and doing all that. And I learned something very important. There are only two areas of the law where you are in court a lot. One of them is criminal law, and the other one is family law. In family law, you are before judges 3 days a week on average. And I love it. I love that process. I like the process of being in court. I really enjoy it. And I said, this is what I want to do. So that's how that came about.
You'd kind of style yourself almost as an intellectual gladiator.
That's a good way of putting it. Yeah. Yeah. That
It's
is a good.
fun. I mean, I hear I talk to a lot of attorneys in my line of work, and I talk to a lot of them in family law. I talk to a lot of them in criminal law. I talk to a lot of them in PI law, and then a smattering in all the other facets. But those are the big three that I talk to, and all of them, you know, when they love trial because they're just like, no, this is my jam. I love the contest. I love the fight, and I love hearing that because it's just
Trial is
fascinating.
fun. Trial is fun. It's exhausting,
Yeah.
but it's fun because you have to be on your game the entire time. You have to listen to everything that happens. At the same time, you have to watch the judge's face and their reaction to things. You have to watch the witnesses. If you're a trial attorney, which I am not, because we don't have juries. I mean, I'm a trial attorney. If you deal with jury trials, which I do not, because juries are non-existent in family court or in Supreme Court with divorces. So my audience is always the judge. But that kind of that knowing your audience, understanding your audience, understanding your judge, and being able to know what makes them tick. This is all an art. It's, it's not a science, a freaking art. It's what you do. It's what you learn to do, and it takes a lot of time to get good at it. Nobody comes out of law school saying, "Ha, I can argue before a Supreme Court, or I can argue before a fucking traffic judge." No one.
Gotcha. No, that makes perfect sense, and I get that 100%. Let me ask you, this is a random side question. I didn't give this to you in the pre-roll, but I'm curious because you're there in New York City. Obviously, about 5 years ago, something happened in the world. Everything kind of shut down, and a lot of people had very different experiences of the pandemic and the response to the pandemic. Now, I happen to know a couple of guys that practice law in New York City. One of them is in a building right there in the financial district that regularly sees, I want to say, like 150,000 people a day go through it. In the peak of COVID, he does PI. In the peak of COVID, he said it was like 187 people that would go through this building every day. It's like it literally was like it was a ghost town.
Mhm.
And he made the comment, he's like, business was bad then because people weren't getting into accidents, which is a good thing, but also not a good thing for him, which was fascinating. And we heard so many different stories about, people forced to, stay in place for 2 weeks or longer to slow the spread. And I'm not going to get into the politics of any of this, but I'm curious what your experience of the pandemic was, both from running a law firm? Did it change the way you do hearings? Did it change the way that you appear before judges? Did you see a spike in cases because people were sick and tired of living together when they were forced to, not leave the house for a month or two or three? Did you not notice a change? What was your experience of the pandemic, the response to the pandemic, and how did it affect your practice?
The pandemic changed the game in New York City and in New York State. So the first part you have to understand is that New York State has been behind the times for a very long time when it comes to technology. A lot of other jurisdictions, a lot of other states, they've enacted e-filing. I know the feds have for years, and I'm talking about prior to 2020. And the states, a lot of states had also moved into e-filing. New York State was one of the few where almost everything had to be done in person. You want to file a motion, got to go to the clerk, got to go do this, do that. And all of a sudden, you couldn't go to court. All of a sudden, you were legally not allowed to be in a courthouse. The judges were not allowed to be in their offices. So you have to figure out. So all of a sudden, New York State, which was just starting to enact this policy, had to put it on overdrive. So when the pandemic started, we're talking about what, a mid-March of 2020, for about 2 weeks, nothing happened. It was just there was nothing could happen. Nobody knew and then how you're going to appear in court. How is the judge going to see you? If you prepare papers, how is it going to be filed? And slowly but surely it started evolving. And then for a very long time, almost everything everything was virtual. Everything was virtual. And then it started. Right now, we're still, a lot of virtual stuff still happens. A lot of stuff's in person. And, I have my issues with what is virtual and what isn't, but that's not for this podcast. But that's what happened. I was sitting in my office for the first 3 months of the pandemic. I was sitting in my office. Nothing was happening. I'd come into the office because I can't work from home. I have kids at home and they're kind of in your face. And there's no way. So I would come into the office, and I was able to, because my staff, my paralegal, my associate, we made very quick arrangements on how they could work virtually. And they went home, and I was here, and we were just doing our best, but it was weird and it was slow. It slowed business down to a crawl for quite a while. There were a lot of problems. It's only now starting to come back to pre-pandemic levels, income-wise, business-wise. Your other part was, how did people behave differently? Some people say they saw a spike in divorces. I did not. What I did see was a spike in stupid people doing stupid things. No. This is so one of the things. One of the things about custody here in New York is that if you're the custodial parent, if you're the parent with whom the child resides with the majority of the time, you can't just willy-nilly get up and relocate to a different state. Just can't do it. It is not, because now you're taking the child away from the other parent. You're making it more difficult for that other parent to have time with their child. But people were doing it all the time. They were just, oh, it's COVID, I could move to, pick a state, Florida, California, Missouri, Montana, you pick it. And they just started moving everywhere, to the point where the head matrimonial judge in New York City, Judge Sunshine, and he wrote an op-ed in the New York Law Journal. The New York Law Journal is kind of the daily newspaper of New York lawyers. And he wrote an op-ed in the New York Law Journal telling everybody, this is not how we do things. Now, obviously, the audience for the Law Journal was primarily lawyers, but hopefully those lawyers were chastised about the law. Not that I needed to be chastised. I knew what it was, and I didn't think it would be changing. But a lot of lawyers thought that, oh, throw out all the rules. We can just do whatever the hell we want. The fact that a judge, a very well-regarded judge, by the way, had to write an op-ed to other lawyers saying, stop acting like fools and get back to your jobs. The job being keeping your clients from doing stupid things, was amazing to me. But yeah, he had to do that. That was the thing I saw that changed a lot, and people got a lot worse. I think that conflicts, people forgot how to fucking behave. And yeah, I'm being very, very, I'm just, people forgot how to behave over the last 3-4 years. They've forgotten that other people exist. And I'm not even talking about kids. I'm talking about adults. It's bad. It's gotten it's just coarsened everything up a little bit. I think that is the effect I see.
No, I would agree with that. I am curious. I'm going to ask you this in a minute. Well, maybe I'll ask you now. What is the recourse? So let's say I'm divorced. Happily, I'm not. I'm married. I have 5 kids. We're together,
Five
but
kids?
we got 5.
Wow.
My oldest is in college. My second oldest just graduated high school. Is going to college. My youngest is going into first grade. So we've got the whole spectrum.
Look at you.
Um, but if I'm in New York and my ex-spouse has custody and in the pandemic or even outside of the pandemic, she just was like, I'm going to Wyoming. What can even be done? Like, does New
I'll
York
tell you
look
what, I'll tell you what what should be done.
okay?
Should. I know many people who don't follow this advice. But the minute that you find out that that the other parent, the custodial parent wants to relocate, you go to a lawyer, you go to a lawyer that does this work, not some guy on the corner who has done 5 divorces, a couple of custody cases, and this case and that case and the third, by somebody who specializes in this area of the law, somebody who concentrates on this area of the law, and you start the process. A motion is filed immediately for immediate relief to stop that parent from relocating, and you get into court immediately. I'll tell you that since the pandemic, there is not a time in the last 5 years that I have not had one, two, sometimes as many as 5 or 10 active cases dealing with this sort of thing. I have 2 cases right now where one parent has just up and disappeared, and the other one is either in China or the Philippines. We're not sure.
Wow.
I,
And at
I,
that
I
point, like there
I mean,
is there extradition or like
you hope it depends on well, if they're in the United States, you find them and you hope that the authorities in that other state are going to follow the court orders and are going to come and arrest the parent and bring the child back to the jurisdiction. That's what you hope. Now, if you are talking about internationally, so that's when you get into some very, very serious issues. There are 2 types of countries for when we're talking about this topic of international parental abductions. There are 2 types of countries. There are Hague and non-Hague. The Hague Convention, I know people know what the Hague is. It's this nice little place up in Europe, but there are many different treaties. There's the Hague Treaty. I don't remember the exact name of it, but it is a treaty. It is an international treaty. If the nations that sign on, they sign on to create a process of what happens if a parent takes a child from one jurisdiction and unlawfully takes him to another jurisdiction. And then if they do that, then you have to initiate proceedings in that jurisdiction to force that parent to come back. The majority of countries do have that. Countries that do not, as far as New York State, New York City is concerned, just we're talking about the populations here in the city, where I see this being a problem. Russia is not a signatory to the Hague Convention, at least not when it comes to with the United States. China has never signed on to the convention, and these are 2 rather large immigrant communities in the United States, in New York City specifically, where where this kind of thing happens. The case I was telling you about China or the Philippines, if that child is in China, there's almost nothing my client can do. If that child is in the Philippines, it's somewhat better because the Philippines signed on fairly recently, and they are still trying to work out, because it's one thing to have a treaty, it's another thing to have a whole ass administration about how you're going to deal with this problem. And they are still in the process of dealing with this, of creating the administrative courts and creating, let's call it, the infrastructure, the legal infrastructure in their jurisdiction to make this happen. So my client is now, we're not sure if the child's in China. All hope is lost. The China's in the Philippines. My client is working with both embassies, at the U.S. embassy, both in China and in the Philippines, to try to work this out. If the kid's in China, especially, and again, when you're talking about international stuff, politics has to come into the conversation. It
yeah.
has to, because you are talking about dealing with a foreign government, and because of the current state of U.S. Chinese politics, it's a problem in this particular case.
So it's a lot easier if they go to Wyoming.
Oh, yes, yes. It's a lot easier, especially considering that there are more cows than humans in Wyoming. So it's probably easier to find somebody than if they go to, say, California.
Fair enough. No, absolutely fair enough. I'm going to scale back for just a minute and just talk a little bit more about you. Now, I'm curious because I know you have a degree in history, and I have a degree in history and philosophy. Very marketable skills. I can ask the deep questions in life, like paper or plastic, or you want fries with that. And that's what led me to into the line of work that I'm in today, which is not working in history or philosophy. But I was curious, what field of history did you study predominantly, or is there a field of history or a time or an era or place or geography that you're really fascinated by?
Well, two, because I was born in the former Soviet Union, so Soviet history has always been interesting to me. So we are talking about the history of the Soviet Union. So we're talking about Russia and the surrounding countries from 1914 until actually now, and U.S. history post 20th and 21st century U.S. history. I find that they are both very interesting, and more importantly, they are both very applicable to the things that are happening today. You could look at, to quote Shakespeare, past is prologue.
Yeah.
If you look at how people behave previously, how administrations behave previously, you can hopefully suss out what the best course of action is today.
Gotcha. No, that makes perfect sense. I was more of a medievalist by trade, but to each their own.
Also
That's totally fine.
fascinating and an amazing time of crazy. So European medievalism we're talking about?
Yeah, and I will say most of my knowledge is atrophied. I still read, but not near as much as I used to. I actually did my undergraduate thesis on the Donner Party, though, because my director was like, "No, I want you to do this." I'm like, "All right, fine." So we did this whole write-up on Donner democracy and how they voted their way into death. Basically, the one thing I remember reading through all the notes and things is when they finally came upon the handful of survivors, in these frozen cabins. One of them had a pot of soup going,
Mm,
and over in the corner of the room was like, a haunch of one of the oxen that had died, and you could have been carving off that and eating it. But what was in the kettle was, if I recall, I think it was lungs and brain, like human lungs and human brain, which apparently were nice and fatty and rich and tasted good. And like, why are you eating this, not the cow? I was like, well, we'd already been eating humans, so and I like the taste better, so I'm just gonna eat what I eat. So anyway, that's neither here nor there, but just random historical this and that's. So talk about your firm for a minute here. You've been practicing law since '03, if I'm not mistaken, assuming my write-up was correct there, give or
yeah,
take.
yeah, yeah.
Um, and I'm a firm believer, obviously, you go up to bat enough, nobody bats 1,000. So I'm sure in your process of practicing law, and you clearly have shown already, you've got a masterful understanding of what's going on in the law, and I'm going to dig into that here in a little bit more. But I just want to know a little bit more generally about you and your firm. What's one of your biggest failures that you've had in your practice law? When I say failure, what I mean is, maybe things didn't turn out the way you thought, maybe a client said the wrong thing, maybe paperwork wasn't filed the wrong way. But what was one of those times in your practice of law, David, that you experienced a failure or a setback? But what did you learn from that, and how do you carry that forward to always make sure you're giving the best care to your clients?
So when we started this, I explained that I'm one of the few completely private attorneys who deals with ACS, who deals with the Child Protective Establishment here in New York City. And I remember about early on, maybe 2 or 3 years into the practice, and I had a case which had some abuse allegations and this and that and the third. And ACS was called in to do evaluations and to do all these things. And looking back at it now, I was a babe in the woods. I had no idea who this agency was. I believe that this agency was there to help the children, to help a client, to help people mend familial bonds that may have been ripped apart due to one parent's misconduct or another parent's misconduct. What I learned at that point, to my detriment and my client's detriment, was that trusting this agency was absolutely the stupidest thing I could possibly do. And at that point, unfortunately, my client lost custody because while what I was expecting was to deal with somebody in good faith, what I was getting back was, so this agency had already made their decision based on pure allegations with no actual facts. And every single interaction that my client or I had with the agency going forward was based upon their presupposition that my client had done the thing.
Mm.
So having had that, now I realize that I am never dealing with a good faith actor when I'm dealing with them. I deal with them like I said early on, like a bad dog and a guy with a fucking newspaper. I slap him on the nose every single time. Even when I have to deal with them, Sometimes they are used by judges in custody cases as an investigatory tool. I sit my clients down and I explain to them who they're dealing with, what they're dealing with, and I insert myself into the process as much as possible to try to make sure that my client does not do the same things that that client did, which is trust them way too much. So that is probably my biggest failure, and also what I learned from that. And then about 10 years ago is when I started really dealing with them on not on custody cases where they were involved, but on actual neglect cases. So a case where they bring you to court because they claim you neglected or abused your kid, and now they want to take that child away from you or from both parents. Sometimes it's from both parents.
I'm a I'm a libertarian at heart. I'm a the government that governs best governs least sort of a guy. So anytime I see a board like this, I'm always at least a little distrusting. But I feel like I would naturally, like you did at least initially, assume they have the child's best interests in mind and everything else. It sounds like you're jaded, if I can say that, to the point you're like, no, they just really. But what causes that? Like, how is it just bureaucracy running itself? Is it these people are really sadists?
They're not.
What causes this to be the case?
So a lot of things.
In
The first one is money. Okay. The money spigot flows from the feds. Federal government, I forget where it is, but the federal government gives matching funds to every single child protective agency in the country every time they do something. They put a parent into a program, whatever that program is, parenting classes, anger management, whatever it is, and they're getting matching funds. Okay, every single child that they put in foster care is worth $50,000 a year at a minimum, maybe more now with inflation, to the agency. Federal funds coming in and paying them. The New York City, not New York State, talking about, now brace yourself. New York City, the budget for ACS in New York City, I think this year, $3.2 billion with a B for one city agency, not state agency, city agency. I mean, yes, this is New York City. We are the most populated city in the country. I get that. The population of New York City is $8.2 million. The population of Wyoming, I think, is a little more than, or maybe even a little more or less than 500,000 people. Yeah. So the population of this little city is orders of magnitudes greater than many states. Not, I'm choosing Wyoming because it's the biggest disparity, but still.
Well, I brought it up earlier, so
right. But there's that. Then there's also the fact that the agency hires the worst people. Their pay sucks. They treat the workers, the ACS workers, what they call child protective specialists, damn near nothing. So they get the worst people. They get the absolute, lowest of the low. All you need is a BA in anything to become a CPS worker. It's all you need. You don't need a master's in social work. You don't need anything really advanced. You need a 4-year degree. That's it. So you're not getting the best and the brightest here. They also treat their attorneys, FCLS, Family Court Legal Services. They treat their attorneys like trash, like absolute trash. And I know this because I know a lot of current and former ACS attorneys. A lot of them are my friends because, again, when they finish working for ACS, they usually gravitate toward 18B work where I deal with them. It's a whole big thing. So it's just what happens. And this is what they do. The agency is overpaid and just absolutely, I don't know how to put it. Not underfunded. They're definitely not underfunded, but underbrained. Maybe that's the word. They're also the only, and this is where it really gets weird. So, have you ever worked for, in your legal career? Have you ever worked for an agency, any agency? Maybe as a district attorney.
No, I have not.
Right, me neither. But I know many DAs. I know many former and current district attorneys. And when you're a DA and you are making a decision regarding how a case is going to go, technically you work for the state of, in this case, New York, but in actuality, you make that decision yourself. With ACS, they create this weird dichotomy. Now, no other agency does this. Every other agency, those attorneys, they are their own client. You don't go to the DA and say, I got to check with my client, the state of New York.
Yeah.
There are certain occasions, if it's a high profile case, an individual, ADA, assistant district attorney, may need to go to the head district attorney of the county in order to kind of make a decision about whatever, like a high profile case. But 99% no. With them, they've created this system where FCLS, the attorneys are just the attorneys. Their client is the agency. They can't make a decision about how a case goes until they talk to the supervisor of that particular case. No, I've never heard of a government agency that has to do that, but they do. And I truly believe that this creates, it's done that way specifically to create this weird dichotomy where the attorney is never the bad guy, even though they work for the same agency. And it's a wild thing, and it's not. This is specifically in New York. I don't know if this is true of any other child protective agency, specifically in New York.
I've heard horror stories about a handful of the other child protective services. I
I
talked to a gal who was out in, I want to say Phoenix, and she was
Arizona,
nothing.
yeah,
Yeah, Arizona. She was nothing but hating on them as well. So clearly, this is kind of the MO.
Just I go on TikTok a lot, and obviously I get a lot of this content. Texas is a hellscape. Arizona is a hellscape off the top of my head. Those two states are absolutely terrible. The other problem is that there are very few attorneys that actually practice in this field, very few private attorneys that actually practice in this field. So you will have situations. Now, New York City, again, is a very unique place. There are, outside of Washington, D.C., there is no other city in the country that has more attorneys per capita than New York. But in a lot of places, including in the rest of New York State, that is not the case. So if you can imagine the largest city in the country, there are maybe 5 attorneys who are completely private and have this skill set. Can you imagine how few there are in Montana, Missouri, Texas? Almost none. Almost none. So you're stuck with whoever you get from the court, if you get anyone. Because certain states, a lot of states, actually, New York is also an outlier in that for custody cases, for child protective cases, if you don't have the means, you have a right to counsel in the same way as in a criminal case, everyone has a right to counsel. Most states don't have that. So not only do you not have, not only is there nobody there, but even if you didn't have the money, even if you had the money, you couldn't find somebody. So
Yeah.
imagine being stuck in this incredibly complicated situation where you can't have an attorney. You don't know anybody, and anybody you find still will not know. I have spoken to so many attorneys, white shoe firms. For those of you who don't know, a white shoe firm is the highest level of law firm in our, we're talking about law firms with thousands of attorneys and corporate attorneys, and they will get involved in a child protective situation. And I've spoken to them, and well, all I have to do is just explain what happened and everything will go away, right? These highly trained attorneys, theoretically highly trained attorneys, and they're acting like a goober on Law and Order who wants to cooperate with the cops and explain why they did what they did. It's amazing, but this is what happens.
Very important follow-up question.
Sure.
Who is your favorite pop culture attorney? Is it
Oh.
someone?
Yeah.
Is it My Cousin Vinny? Is it Perry Mason? Is it someone from Law and Order?
I gotta say it's probably from Vinny, from My Cousin Vinny.
Every attorney I talk to, like, that's
Well,
the best, most accurate picture of law ever.
well, there's that, and the fact that the character is from Brooklyn, and that's where I live. My office is here, but I live in Brooklyn. I have for most of my life. So
That's fair. That's
That,
fair. That's fair. It's either him or Atticus Finch for most people, and I think Venny is by far. I need to start tracking this data because I do find it fascinating. So all of this began because I was asking you about your biggest failure and what you learned. Clearly, what you learned led you to be an expert in this area, and that itself is a success. But if I were to ask you about maybe one or two of your cases or your moments in your practice of law, David, that you would consider to be a real success, the proverbial feathers in your cap, so to speak,
Mhm.
what would come to mind?
Okay, I'll give you, there's one in particular. I love telling the story. There are two actually, and they both involve the same types of clients. So I've had a lot of just a lot of very weird people I've represented. And I have had several clients who worked in one way or another for three-letter agencies. I can't tell you which agencies, but they're agencies such as the NSA, the FBI, the CIA, the DIA, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
The alphabet soup of the government.
Yes, very interesting and very interesting agencies. And both of these stories come from those two cases like that. There was one case where I was representing someone who had who worked for that kind of an agency, and they had married someone who was an awful human being, unfortunately, and they had made some very silly allegations. But in family law in most states, all you need is an allegation to get a very basic order of protection. Sometimes they're called orders of protection, sometimes they're called PPOs, personal protection orders, but basically it's a civil order that says that you can't come next to this person, these people. Usually it involves your child. So I remember I had the mother on the stand and I was cross-examining her about the absolute ridiculousness of the allegations. And I asked her, do you remember when the cops came to your house at this time? Yes, I do. And then she says, did you get a piece of paper? Now, in New York, you get these things, I call them pink sheets. They're called up domestic violence orders, I forgot what they're called, but they're basically the pink part of a form that the cops fill out in triplicate whenever they go to somebody and there's any kind of a domestic incident report. That's what it's called, DIR. I expected her to say yes. What she said was, sure, and here it is. She reaches into her purse, brings it out. Now you have to understand, because these are hearsay under New York law. There's almost no way to get these into the record. But I was able to, with her bringing it out and showing, yeah, here's the original. I have it right here. These are the statements that I made to the cops. I was able to bring it into the record. I was able to cross-examine her on that sheet of paper, demonstrate to the judge what the differences were between her testimony and what she told the cops on that day, and ultimately the family offense petition against my client was dismissed. So, and then there was another time, and this is just weird. So the person I was representing the first time was not actively working for that agency. But when you represent someone, and this may be for other lawyers if they ever do, when you represent someone who works for one of these agencies actively, you will get a call from the State Department. When you get that call, that State Department attorney is going to vet you a little bit. And after you're vetted, you're going to get a small, tiny measure of security clearance in order to be able to talk to your client about the thing that he does, whatever that may be. And because it's the only way you can represent your client, especially in a case involving custody. So the one thing that the attorney that I spoke to, the one thing that attorney explained to me is that if it is ever asked what your client does, the only thing that you can say, and you have to understand, this is the State Department telling you this. The only thing that you can say is, my client works for the US government. You cannot elaborate in any other way outside of my client works for the US government. Now, if you are in the DC area, Southern Maryland, Northern Virginia, obviously DC, and you say those words, the questioning on that title stops. Everybody knows what you meant. They're like magic words. Poof, all of a sudden you move on. We're not in that area. So I'm doing the thing. And up until then, the bunch of times that that the question of what my client does for a living came up, I was able to just not answer it, move past it. And we're doing this towards the end of it, and the question is asked again. And I just say, my client works for the US government. Now, and I'm going to say this, fortunately, this was before a judge who knew me very well, who respected me and whom I respected. So I was very lucky in this. So we start off, I say, my client works for the US government. And the other attorney says, but what does he do? My client works for the US government. Yes, but what does he do? Well, my client works for the US government. We go back and forth about 3-4 times, and now the judge is getting upset. This is also a judge who, despite the fact that she respects me, gets upset very easily. She has a reputation for this. So we go back and forth. Now the judge is asking me the same questions, and now I'm being a little bit more serious, but my client works for the US government. I can see she's getting upset. So I say to her, Judge, can I have a bench conference? Of course. And then we both start moving up. I said, no, Your Honor, I need to speak to you ex parte. Now, again, for those of you who are watching this, who are not attorneys, you never speak to a judge alone. Any communication you have with a jurist has to be with the other side there, whether it's a communication in court, whether it is out of court, if you're writing an email, whatever it is, a letter, everything has to go with the other side. No. Now the judge is looking at me like I'm crazy. And I said to the judge, look, Judge, if I'm wrong in what I am asking you, you can find me in contempt. I am confident that this is what needs to happen. Judge looks at me sideways and says, okay. So I approach her. Now I'm standing nose to nose with her. And she looks at me, David, what does your client do? Judge, my client works for the US government. I know you've said that so many times. What does he do? Judge, my client works for the US government. She leans back in her chair, kind of big smile, says, what does he do? Work for the insert 3-letter agency here. I look at the judge like this and I say, Judge, my client works for the US government. And then finally the conversation stops. So yeah, that was that. We were successful in doing what we needed to do at the end of the day. We got past that, but that is probably, I call that a success because I didn't go to jail, either federal or state. I didn't get found in contempt, and we were able to get through it.
It's the little victory sometimes. So here's a related question, and I feel like that one would honestly answer this question, but you probably have other stories as well. What's one of the most absurd things other than that you've encountered, or is that like peak absurdity? Because that is, I mean, that feels like something that could be a skit almost on SNL or something. But
Whenever I see that judge, I always look at her. Hey, Judge, remember my client works for the U.S. government. Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I wasn't even exaggerating. It happened almost exactly that way. The attorney on the other side, who I also see regularly, we joke about it all the time. So what you want to know what other absurd thing?
Yeah, what's the most absurd thing? I don't know if that counts as absurd or just like it's funny because your hands were tied and whatnot, but are there any things that maybe a parent with a crazy demand, or maybe and again, dealing with it sounds like ACS is absurd in and of itself. So we've already I guess tackled absurdity, so we can move on if you want, but if you have anything,
I'll give you one absurdity because we talked about relocation.
Yeah.
And I had this case and I had to go back and help this client 3 times in 2 years. And the reason was the first time this client came to me, he found out that the mother of his son wanted to move to another state. And I had to go into court and had to stop her from doing it. And then she dropped it before we went to trial. And then not a year later, she was originally from Germany. She comes back. My client calls me back. She told me that in 3 weeks, she is taking the kid and moving to Germany. So she thought that this crazy woman who thought that, okay, and I'm sorry, she was crazy. She was a woman. That is what you're going to be. If any of your viewers are upset by that, I'm sorry. But this woman thought that, okay, the court isn't going to let me move to, I don't remember where it was. I think it was Illinois. But it'll be fine if we move to Germany. I don't understand how somebody could do that. So we went back, and during the middle of all this, it turns out the reason she wanted to move was because she had a boyfriend. So she leaves the kid with my client moves to Germany, and then not 3 months later moves back. And this is the third time we're in court. And now she's claiming, well, I'm back. I want the kid a majority of the time again. The absurdity of people is most of the absurdities in my practice are just how absurd people are. And that is just off the top of my head demonstrates just the level of crazy and sometimes stupid that I deal with. Fortunately, that time it wasn't my client. But I've had plenty of times when my own clients say, well, why can't I do this? Well, because then you would be, I don't know, putting your child in danger. You would be alienating your child from the other parent, something that, and the fact that somebody does not see that that is a problem scares me.
Yeah.
Scares me
No,
for say.
absolutely. Absolutely. So you have to deal with very trying emotional issues on a regular basis. I always thought when I looked at law, I always thought that criminal law sounded really hard to me because if I knew the guy was guilty, though I respect completely the concept of everyone has the right to the day in court. I think that's one of the things that makes American jurisprudence the thing that it is, right? What separates us as a country from so many other places. I appreciate it. I think it'd be hard to do. I thought PI might be fun, but they deal with, some very gratuitous scenes sometimes as well. But in family law in particular, you have to deal with sometimes, I would think, some of the hardest issues because you're dealing with children on a
Yeah.
regular basis. Children that are emotionally hurt, emotionally damaged, they're vulnerable. I mean, we know divorce is more or less an epidemic. It's I don't know what the stats are. It's maybe not one in two
50%.
marriages.
It's it's on average, it's almost exactly 50%, up down 1% every couple of years.
Yeah, I see it bounce around or whatnot. So I guess my question is, how do you, well, first off, how do you deal with the emotional aspects that deal with your clients, with their children, and does it ever get to you? And if so, what do you do when it gets to you?
So how do I deal with it? I have a very thick skin. I And this is going to sound terrible, but a lot of these things, if you're not you're gonna laugh, otherwise you're gonna cry. And I laugh at a lot of it. I look at the absurdity of it, and I have to laugh. It's kind of ridiculous. I have to remember that these clients, I am not them. They are not my family. These children are not my children. I represent people. I represent adults. So even, and I have to explain this to clients a lot. I understand that your child is the most important thing to you, but you are my client and you are what's most important to me. Whether it is, and I understand that what you want most is for your client, for your kid to live with you. But sometimes I have to advise clients, let the other parent fuck it up. Let the other parent make the mess, and then I can go into court and I can say, "Hey, look, Your Honor, look at the mess that this other parent made. This child should be with my client who doesn't make messes like this." And it's hard to advise clients of this because they want to protect their kid. But
Yeah.
I have to explain this very often to clients. It's not about, for me, it's not about your child. It's about you. It's about getting you what you want in the long term. If that means in the short term, you have to sit back and let the other parent make a mess. Sure. It's that simple. I mean, that is how I handle it. I have to keep there. It has to be compartmentalized. You cannot take a case and think that, oh, this is your child. I have two kids, only two, no more, no less. And that is it. And everything else is just a legal problem that needs to be solved. That's all it is. I mean,
I,
I know it sounds a little heartless, but it's the only way that most of us can keep our sanity.
yeah. Have you ever had to deal with a client where you were of the mindset that it would actually be better for the children to go to the other parent? And if so, what do you do in that situation, or do you still just
Oh,
represent
oh,
your client?
see that, no. And does it happen? Sure. Do I sometimes think that my clients are not the best? Absolutely. You represent hundreds, thousands of clients after a long enough period of time, and you will find that you have some people who are just not great. But you do the best job you can. It is an adversarial process. The legal process in this country is an adversarial process, and you are there to advocate for your client. All right, for better or for worse. Do I try to advise clients to be a better person? Absolutely, because it betters their case.
Yeah.
it at the end of the day, telling a client, look, maybe you shouldn't take the child skydiving because that might put the child at risk of harm and demonstrate that perhaps you don't have the best decision making, the best parental decision making on the planet. Perhaps you shouldn't do that. Do I tell them that? Absolutely. But will I will I change how hard I work for a client if I don't agree with them? No, absolutely not. My job is to advocate for my client as zealously as possible within the bounds of legal ethics and the law. And that is what I will do every single time. It's the other attorney's job to do the same thing for their client. And at the end of the day, that's why we have trials. When we have trials, more often than not, the truth gets out.
Would
No
you?
one, no, go
Oh, go
ahead.
ahead. No, go ahead.
Oh, just to finish it, no one is that good at being bad that they're going to be able to hide it for a long period of time.
When do you recommend settlement over trial? Or I know you like trial. Obviously, it's like
99% of the time is the answer.
you
I'll cut
recommend
you off.
settlement.
99, yes. The reason being is you never know what's going to happen at trial. You simply cannot.
Hmm.
A trial can go any number of ways. We've all had those surprises. At least with a settlement, you know what you're going to get. Now, I would say I said 99% of the time, I will recommend settlement. 9 out of 10 times cases settle. Now that's what, a 9 point difference, nine percentage point difference, because those 9 percentage points are when you realize that what your client wants and what the other side wants are two things that simply cannot align. And the only way to deal with it is to go to trial. You know, the worst thing to do, in my opinion, is to recommend a bad settlement to a client. Not
Yeah.
saying that every client I've had has gone with my recommendation. I've had cases where I have told clients, look, this is not a good settlement, but they wanted to end it. So they agreed to something that I advised them against after advising them. And yeah, that happens. That happens probably fairly often in my field, relatively often, like more often than I would say in a lot of other fields.
Have you ever had clients you're representing husband, the wife, whatever, and in the midst of the divorce, somehow you help them to totally reconcile and they even like cease getting divorced? Does that ever happen? And if so, does it ever
Couple,
pan out? Or is it like a well, they cooled it for a year and then we're back at it again?
the closest I can say was a case where I was representing a gentleman, and it seemed that the two of them were absolutely a million years apart. And I was doing the job, opposing counsel was doing the job, and then me and the relationship between the client and I soured. So then he decided to represent himself. Okay, fine. So then about a year later, I ran into the attorney from the other side and I asked him, hey, what happened with those two clients? And he said, they're reconciled. You never know. I've had that happen. A couple of more times there have been where people have reconciled. More often than not, people kind of forget about cases because with divorce cases, there is a period of time before you get the court involved where you start the case, but because there's no judge, there's nothing kind of egging you on to move forward to finish the case.
Hmm.
So sometimes clients just stop getting back to you, and then you found out 1, 2, 5 years later that these two people reconciled. Who knew?
Who knew?
Yeah. So it does happen. I mean, anything is possible. It does happen. Sometimes people realize that they're better miserable together than miserable separately.
Yeah. We're more miserable apart than we are together, so we'll just put up with it.
Yep.
So you've been practicing since '03. '03 brought about the dawn of Facebook. And obviously everything has changed since then. Social media is a huge juggernaut of societal change for sure. What trends are you seeing in custody and divorce disputes that are arising today that weren't common back then? Does it mostly revolve around things like social media? Are there other things that people wouldn't normally expect that have really changed in the last 20 years that are really shaping the landscape? And
Evidence.
where do you think the next 20 years will lead us to?
Well, as far as social media in my area of the law, because I deal with evidence, And social media posts can be evidence, pictures can be evidence, and people, even people who you would think are smarter than this, live their lives out loud on social media, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, whatever it is, whatever flavor you fancy. And what the amount of evidence that people give up through social media that the other party can use is vast. That is the big thing, that is the big difference. Great example, great real world example, fairly recent. I have a case right now where unfortunately there's a lot of domestic violence. There was a lot of domestic violence, and then all this. I'm representing the wife, the victim, and the husband wants to normalize his parental access. And the court, based upon the allegations, is taking it very slowly and giving him very little time. And this person, acts in court like all he wants to do is have as much time as he can with his kid. That's great. Except that for 3 weeks, he claimed he was sick, dog ate his homework, and da 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 da. Turns out, based upon his Instagram posts, he was partying in the Bahamas. How stupid do you have to be? I advise clients when we start a case, specifically when we start a divorce, but also a custody case, turn off your social media. Post nothing. Hell, delete your accounts. There is no reason for you to live out loud on any social media platform, because you're inevitably going to give someone a peek into your life that can be used against you. The worst part about it is that nobody lives their real life on Facebook. They only bring out, the best parts, right? So if you're claiming, for example, that you have no money, let's say it's a child support case, and you're claiming that you're broke, you're dead broke. And then I get social media posts of you in the Maldives throwing money at dancers and snorting coke off of hookers' asses. That's going to be a problem. But that's happened. Maybe not exactly that, but versions of that have happened multiple times. I've had cases, again, child support cases are the worst for this, where somebody claims they got no money, and then all of a sudden they're out on Instagram showing off their new Mercedes that they just got for cash. Absolutely happened. And now that there's no version of that. That has happened multiple times. One time it was a Mercedes, another time it was an Audi. The best one was the Bentley. It was a used Bentley, though.
Well, I mean, they're reasonable, right?
Exactly.
You can't be absolutely extravagant. You lose the resale, right? When you drive it off the lot, everyone knows that. You go with the used. So.
Exactly.
This is kind of related then, maybe. How do I want to phrase this? What kind of behaviors or situations most often lead to ACS investigations? Do situations like this lead to ACS investigations if it comes out in trial, or is
what do you mean by situations like this? Like this what?
So, snorting coke off of the hooker.
Oh yeah,
or
absolutely.
lying about finances, or partying in the Bahamas,
What I find interesting, what I find more interesting are situations where ACS should be involved and doesn't get involved.
I guess that's kind of what I'm angling at is do you ever feel like, you know what, I need to get ACS on this?
Oh yes. Oh yes. I'll tell you, I have a case right now. I told you about the case where the mother has disappeared. We're pretty sure she's still in New York State, right? Told you about that. 2 kids. And as far as we know, they're not going to school. Now in New York State, that's called educational neglect.
Mm.
By law, in every state, kids have to go to school. As far as you know, these kids aren't going to school. My client has custody, but the mother ran off with these kids, and ACS, despite this case going and going and going, this mother disappearing with these children, and ACS being aware, they have yet to file a neglect against this woman, despite the fact that at the very least, there's educational neglect. There's also fairly good evidence that she has mental health issues. And if you are a custodial parent that has mental health issues and refuses to treat them, that is also neglect under New York law.
Gotcha.
But they are perfectly happy to sit back and not do anything because technically there's a custody case. Now you have to understand that what a judge can do in a custody case is not nearly what a judge can do if they file an ACS case. But they don't want to do the work because another judge is looking at it and they figure, well, if something happens to these children, we can't be blamed because we're not involved.
Gotcha.
You got to understand about the agency, specifically the New York City agency, the ACS specifically. They are a broken agency.
Yeah.
Every single time they fuck up, when they lose a kid, when a kid gets hurt or heaven forbid killed, they fail up. Their funding goes up because what they do is say, if we had more money, we would be able to monitor this situation. It is so what happens inevitably is whenever they lose a kid, what will happen is they will go on a huge tear, taking kids more often than not. Because a lot of times that decision is purely administrative. So they'll start snatching kids up here, there, and everywhere. Woo! And most of these parents do not have access to the kind of money that is required to hire a private attorney who gives half a toss about their kid. So what they get is they get some overworked court-appointed attorney for whom this is just another case. This is what happens.
What do you recommend? What is your immediate advice if somebody gets that knock on the door?
The minute you have any interactions with ACS, you go to an attorney. They come to your house. You determine their ACS, okay. And then once whatever that interaction is, that interaction should be, what's your name? My name is X. Can I see your child? Why? Well, we got a complaint. Okay. Where'd you get the complaint from? We can't tell you. Well, I'm sorry, I can't talk to you because my attorney has instructed me not to. And then as soon as that door closes, you find an attorney. Immediately. You don't try to explain it away. You don't. And the thing, and here's the part that drives me absolutely crazy. I'm not cheap. I don't tell people I'm cheap. I don't make out like I'm cheap. I'm damn expensive. But what's more important to you, a parent? Is it more important to you to save some bucks, or is it more important to you to make sure that your kid is going to stay in your home? What is more important to you? And I can't tell you how many people it's more important to them to save some bucks. That actually, as a parent, that makes me very sad. It really does.
I'm going to put this pragmatically for a minute too. Even if let's assume they're idiots and they don't care about their children, I would assume if you lose custody, there's also going to be questions of child support and everything else. And so, by scrimping on your lawyer, it might still cost you 100 times that in what you have to pay over the
if you're
12 to 18 years.
Let's say you're the custodial parent, right? The first, and there's a non-custodial parent that's in the picture. That's not always the case, but let's say that happens, right? And and the first place that child is going to be placed is going to be with the other parent. And that other parent immediately can, if there's a child support order that says that money goes from the earlier non-custodial parent to the custodial parent, now immediately that newly custodial parent can go to court, suspend the child support order that they have to pay to you, and then and ask the court for child support to them from you. And that's immediate. Now, does every parent do it? No. A lot of them wait a little while to do it, but it'll eventually happen.
Yeah.
So
there you go.
Don't off the top of my head, there's that.
Don't screw up on your attorney, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
It'll bite you in the butt in the end. Well, David, I really appreciate you giving me as much time as you have. We've already crossed the hour point. I don't want to take up your whole morning, your whole afternoon at this point. So here in a minute, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you my 3 closing questions. I'll give them to you now so you can percolate on them, and then I'll ask them to you again after we jump over and take a look at your site. Question number 1 is, if I give you a magic wand, and with that magic wand, you can change something about your day-to-day law practice, what would you change and why?
Okay.
Number 2, you go back in time, you meet young David, and you can give him some advice, maybe fresh out of law school, maybe before then. Other than the obvious, buy a lot of Bitcoin, hold it to 100K, right? Would you give yourself and why? And number three is if I give you my magic pen, and with this pen, you can strike a law from the books, edit a law that's on the books, or add a new law to the books. It could be New York State specific, New York City specific. It could be nationwide law. It can be with sweeping ramifications. It can be getting rid of parking tickets. What law would you change and why? While you percolate on those, I'm going to jump over one more time and we're going to take a look at your site. I am talking, as a reminder, to David Zaslavsky, who runs the eponymous law firm that bears his name. That is Zaslavsky Law com. As always, we'll have a link down below. In the very first thing in the show notes will be the link to his website as well as phone numbers and everything else. You can come here and contact him. If somebody wants to contact you, do they get like an initial consultation for free, or at least like a, hey, what do I do? What are my next steps? Or how, what does that process look like?
I'll usually talk to somebody for a few minutes and just figure out what's going on. Sometimes I'll give them some advice if there's something that they have to do, like just something that is really important that they should do or not do immediately. I'm not just going to say, well, you got to pay me money before I tell you anything. I don't do that. But if
Mhm.
they wanted, if they want a sit down consultation where we're going to be talking about very substantive areas of law of their case, it'll usually be an hour of my time, which I will charge them. But generally speaking, if they decide to retain me that same day, I'll waive that. So that's how I usually operate.
Okay. I mean, that's totally fair. It is what it is, and the laborer deserves his wages, as a famous Jewish carpenter once said, I think. And I think that definitely applies in this situation as well, 100%. And again, you want the best. And I can't speak definitively, but I can say just in talking with you, you sound like you have one heck of a head on your shoulders, and I think someone would be silly to not at least seek out good counsel with you. So
Thank you.
again, we will have links to David's information down below in the descriptions. Our final sponsor for today is Rank with News. Is not being featured in the news regularly costing your firm or your company credibility and visibility? Do you feel that getting found in Google is really just about dumb luck and not science? What if there was a guaranteed way to get your law firm or business featured in major national publications like Yahoo News, Business Insider, Bloomberg, Forbes, etc., and see those articles ranking locally, sometimes nationally, sometimes in under 8 hours for major competitive keywords that people are already looking for? Well, what else would you need to know? Rank with News is simply the most powerful way to hit page one in under 2 weeks safely, organically, and permanently. This is guaranteed SEO, search engine optimization on steroids, ranking quickly and sticking long term because you're punching above the weight of your own website with brands like Yahoo News, Bloomberg, and Reuters. If you're tired of poor visibility for your business or firm, visit rankwithnews.com and book a time to speak with a specialist about featuring your firm in major national 8 to 9 figure traffic sites that can launch you to page one in a matter of hours and help you dominate your local marketplace. Get media exposure, rank higher in Google, build credibility, and win more customers and clients with rankwithnews.com. And as always, we will have links to all of our sponsors in the show notes at the bottom as well. So please go down there, support the sponsors. It does obviously help our show as well. So, David, I have a magic wand and I toss it your way. And with that magic wand, you can change something about your practice. It could be now you've got 15 new attorneys. It can be now you're number one on Google. It can be anything at all. What would you change about your practice and why?
Honestly, I would love to figure out a way to do more of the practice of law and less of the business of law. When you're when you're running your own firm, you spend at least half of the time running the firm, working with maybe interpersonal issues with your staff, dealing with marketing, just talking to new clients, and which can take up a lot of time depending upon how often you get called. And I would love it if there was a way to automate all of that enough so that perhaps I could only spend 25% of my time on the business of law and 75% of my time on the practice of law. But because at the end of the day, that's why I got into this. I like the practice of law.
You are a legal gladiator, 100%.
Thanks.
Question number two. We go back in time and we meet young David, and this is without breaking the space-time continuum, but you're able to, whisper some piece of advice in your ear. What advice would you give yourself and why?
I thought about this, and the one thing I would tell David when he started is to read cases religiously. Something I
Mhm.
started doing about a decade ago was creating my own personal database of cases. We subscribe to various newsletters and they send us cases of interest in our field. I get it through the New York Law Journal, which I subscribe to, and they send me a list of interesting cases, specifically cases involving family law for me. And for about the last 10 years, I read those cases. I read those decisions. A lot of times it's to cheat. I know that sounds awful, right? But let's say you have a judge that wrote an opinion about a particular area, about a particular topic that now, 3 years later, you have to write on for a motion or for a memorandum of law. Well, why recreate the wheel? Why not just take that decision, crib out the logic, crib out the case law, take 10, 15 minutes to make sure that that case law hasn't changed somehow, and then use it. Saves time, save effort. And like I said, I started doing this about a decade ago. I wish I started doing it 2 decades ago. You keep on saying you're knowledgeable, you're this, you're that. Yeah, the reason I am isn't just because of the cases I have, but because of the cases I read.
Yeah. I mean, you're gaining knowledge vicariously in that case. It's almost like trying the case, but just getting the knowledge of the after effect of the case.
Exactly.
That's
Exactly.
not that's doing your due diligence. That's doing your research. I think if I needed an attorney, I want to know that they were doing that on a regular basis. In fact, so
Mhm.
the fact of doing that, I think, again, speaks highly of you.
Sure.
Okay, question number 3. Now I have a magical pen here. It's a miraculous pen, actually. I'm going to give a free shout out to kansasmonks.org. There's a Benedictine monastery in Atchison, Kansas. I think one of the monks there must have blessed this pen because it has miraculous powers. With this pen, you can strike a law from the books, you can edit a law that's on the books, or add a new law. If I gave you this miraculous pen and you could make one change, David, what law would you change and why?
Oof. And the answer to this is very simple. That's complicated, but it's simple for me. And I would modify New York State's child support law. So the way the child support works in every state, and it is based on a federal statute called the CSSA, Child Support, I forget what the other Standards Act. That's what it is, CSSA. And what the CSSA does is it gives matching funds to states as long as they have a particular way of child support enforcement. The feds say you have to do it this way. They give you a kind of the infrastructure which you have to build, and if you build it out and you create these local laws that kind of match this federal law, you will get federal funds. So the way it works is it creates a formula for how much child support somebody has to pay. It's based upon income. Some states have it based upon other things, like how much time a parent spends with a child. But in New York, it's based on it's based on which parent is the custodial parent. And that part is who the child's with which parents the child spend a majority of nights. That is how it works in New York. Other states, there's a percentage. Like if, let's say, out of any 2 weeks, out of any 14 days, let's say for the sake of argument that it's a 6-8 split, right? One parent has the child for 6 days, the other parent's child for 8 days. Well, then the percentages are going to be this versus a parent who only sees a child every other weekend, so approximately 4 days a month. In New York, it doesn't matter if you see the kid 4 days a month. It doesn't matter if you see the kid only 48% of the time. However it works out, you're the non-custodial parent. The other part of it is how child support is calculated in New York. So I'm sure that many of your viewers are W-2 employees if they're not attorneys. They look at their W-2 and they see, wow, I made $1,000 last week, but I'm only bringing home 700. Okay, where does that come from? Well, I see this line over here for state taxes, and I see FICA, and then I see federal withholding. And the biggest chunk is always federal withholding, right? So in New York State, federal withholding is not counted against your net for the purpose of child support. So what does that mean? That means, let's say that you make $100,000 a year. Now, with your regular withholdings, you're going to bring home about 70,000, more or less. That's what you're going to bring home. And then there's a percentage of child support. Let's say you have one child, it's 17% from that number. But no, in New York, federal withholding is not counted. So even though you're taking 17% from you're only bringing home 17% of your 70,000, which is the net, and that doesn't include anything else, any other, if you're paying for a 401k, whatever, it doesn't include that. You're paying 17% of 90,000. because federal withholding is not counted.
Hmm.
That is how New York State works. It is inequitable. It is ridiculous. It's not like anybody can bow out of paying taxes legally. But somehow in New York, federal withholding is not counted as a legitimate deduction from child support in New York State. It is mind-boggling. It also makes New York one of the most draconian states when it comes to paying child support. And it puts a lot of people, considering how expensive it is to live in New York City. New York State, not so much, but New York City and its environs, New York City and Nassau and Suffolk County, which is Long Island. Going north, you have Westchester, and the farther north you go, the less expensive it gets. But when you're talking about New York City, that's a lot of money. And there are people out there who have trouble paying their rent because of that federal withholding chunk that is not included when calculating child support. So yeah, that's the big one.
That's the big one. I mean, you could have just gotten rid of taxes. I'm just saying.
I'm sorry, I'm not a libertarian like you, sir.
There's two things in life that are certain, as they say, right?
Exactly.
Well, David, thank you very much for taking the time to talk with me today and sharing your wisdom with my listeners. I really do appreciate it. I always like to let my guests have the last word. Are there any parting words of thoughts or that you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Two things. The first thing is I want to thank you for having me. This has actually been lots of fun. I enjoyed this. I love talking about myself. I have nothing if not humble.
That's what I'm here for.
Yeah,
You're the most.
but the other thing is get a lawyer, people. Don't think that custody cases specifically are probably the most complicated legal conundrum that anyone can get into. More complicated than anything else. Why? Because the standards are so weird. The standard for custody in this and every other state is what is in the best interest of the child. How do you, as a person who hasn't been doing it, figures that out and figures how to argue that? It is a non-standard standard. What does that mean? It could mean anything, and it does mean anything. And now you have to be able to, as a person who has never stepped inside a courtroom, argue this absolutely just I don't even know what to call it, this non-standard standard, but you got to argue it. Get a professional. Also, because I assume for most people, their kids are the most important things in their lives. So button down, get an attorney. May not be me, but someone who knows this work, because you can't do it yourself.
I think you said it very well. Absolutely 100%. Well, David, again, thank you very much for joining me on the podcast today. I've really enjoyed this. This has been, as always, The Attorney Post. I am your host, Justin West. I've been chatting with David Zaslavsky of the eponymous law firm that bears his name, Zaslavsky Law. As always, we will have a link in the description down below. As always, though we do talk about a host of legal issues on this podcast does not constitute legal advice. And if you have a legal issue, you should always seek the advice of a competent attorney in your area who focuses on the matter that you need help with. Now, I can confidently say that if you're in New York and you're having an issue, particularly with ACS or any kind of a marital issue, divorce-related marital issue, not, therapy. David sounds like he's got a phenomenal head on his shoulders and be a great resource to you. So please feel free to use his information down below. As far as the podcast goes, if you're watching this on any of the major podcast repositories, Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, whatever, please rate us on those, like us, whatever it is they let you do. If it lets you make a comment, make a comment. On YouTube especially, comments are great. Share out down below something that you learned. But the number one thing you can do to help us grow this podcast is just this. If you know somebody that would benefit from the knowledge in this episode, particularly somebody that's maybe in New York City and facing an ACS issue right now, share this podcast with them. Help them to get the knowledge they need to face that issue, because as I always say, if you don't know your rights, you don't have any. Until next time, I'm Justin. Thank you for listening, and bye-bye.